Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing going on over there, and I'm watching nervously from Ontario.
What's kind of
it's too close.
What's the sentiment in Ontario? Like, do they watch it pretty closely? What happens in Alberta, or is it?
No, people in Ontario fucking suck. No one cares.
They don't care about Alberta at all. They don't, right, exactly. Don't think about Alberta at all.
I would say that it's not that they actively don't care. It's just that it's not even on their mind. I don't think that there's, I don't gather a negative sentiment or connotation toward Albertans or Alberta from the people I associate with at all. It's just not even on their radar.
So they don't really understand what's happening here, or
they don't understand.
We're facing.
They don't understand that if we don't win Alberta, we might not get our country back.
Yeah, that we're literally like the driver of the country.
Yeah, I've described this to David numerous times because we talk about it all the time, obviously. But if like Alberta's the tip of the spear, if we don't get Alberta right, the rest of the country will slide. If Alberta goes to the NDP, I mean, I don't want to be dystopian and negative, but I don't know how it turns out well. I just don't.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we'll be past the point of no return. It kind of feels like right now, like we're sitting at this very precipice. That's kind of what caused me to get so engaged too, that if we continue forwards, and we're allowed to continue forwards by defeating the NDP in the provincial election, then we can seek that prosperity and autonomy with the Sovereignty Act as one of our tools. And we can create a huge amount of prosperity for our province and undo a lot of the wrongs that have been done. But if we're not successful in the provincial election, I don't know if we can come back from the damage that will be caused. And
not only would you be able to create a lot of economic prosperity for the province of Alberta, but I don't live in Alberta. I want Albertans to thrive, absolutely. But what is most important to me from the perspective of someone who lives in Ontario, who cares about the future of the country, is that if we don't have Alberta to set apart as an example of a different way things can be done, we will have zero contrast. And that lack of contrast will, in my opinion, bury the country because no one will see that there's a better way to do things. And we need Alberta right for that.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think actually Alberta has been kind of a light globally for like the freedom movement and fighting for our rights to self-determination and all those things. It's noticed around the world.
Yeah, well, think about how many trucks came from Alberta for the Freedom Convoy, right? It, in many ways, originated it definitely originated in that part of the country, but largely in Alberta itself. So many trucks came from Alberta. It was Albertans it was, I don't want to deflect from the rest of the country. It was a movement of the whole country, but a lot of the catalyst did come from Alberta, and Alberta represents that catalyst in more than just the convoy. They represent the catalyst right now in making sure that we stay the way that we're supposed to. So I'm watching very closely what happens in Alberta. And I thank both David and both Tanya for all that they're doing to make sure that we get Alberta right. Usually we do a big fancy intro, but we're already kind of rolling in my opinion. So we're welcome. Yeah. We're welcoming back Tanya Clemens. So thank you for being here. We're really excited to talk to you. How are you doing today?
Good. Every morning I actually wake up pretty scared and overwhelmed going, oh my gosh, what do I have to do today? I'm kind of new to this role in a political world. So campaigning and everything is a little bit new to me, but I've got.
This is a perfect opportunity for the listeners to get a bird's eye view of someone who's decided to take the step of putting their name on a ballot. That's a very hard thing to do. I've worked with hundreds of people who have done this, and every single person that I've met who's done it, despite my differences with them on policy that I've worked with, I've been impressed with the willingness to take that step, because you immediately receive tons of criticism. You immediately have to question yourself and be like, how many friends do I actually have? How many people actually like me? How many, who am I? Like it's a very taking a leadership role is something that we often mock in our modern world. Like we're like, oh, the leaders, and we talk about them. But when you step into the arena, you realize it's a lot harder than maybe people make it out to be from the sidelines. So, what is your? Let's go from bird's eye view and then go into the nitty gritty of it. What's the overwhelming feeling that you're experiencing now that you're running for office or trying to? So basically, for those who don't know, you are running for a nomination in Livingstone-Macleod to be the representative for the United Conservative Party in the upcoming May election.
That's right.
So for our American listeners, not that we have that many, but for American listeners, this is the equivalent of a primary, except Canada is very democratically illiterate. So basically nobody participates. It would be like 1,000 people be a huge, huge event. So anyway, with that said, what is the overwhelming, what are you realizing as you're pursuing this step?
Well, I'm realizing that there's actually a lot more hope out there and support than I realized at the start. I think a large part of that is what you've been doing in other organizations like Alberta Prosperity Project. And there's lots of Facebook groups holding MLAs accountable, tons of groups that have been actively engaged in educating our grassroots and how they can participate in democracy and actually how their voice matters and has power. Whereas I think we've spent a lot of, especially the last couple of years, feeling like we were solitary individuals and there was no way out of things. We had no voice. So I think that I hold on to that our grassroots are going to have a voice this election. We're going to be able to speak to them and for them and advocate for them. So my feeling is hope. And I can see the trajectory that we're on with Daniel Smith at the helm and the direction that the UCP is going. And I'm supportive of that. I like that they've got a goal of creating sovereignty within Canada and prosperity for our province. So when I think about all those things, I definitely feel hopeful and good. But still, every morning I wake up scared that I'm in this process going, oh my gosh, what do I do now? What's the best way to reach people and hear people and listen people and be accessible? So yeah, that's my overall.
Well, it's interesting. It's almost like for people who have never done it before, getting into a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym for the first time. You enter into the arena and there's probably things that you don't even know that you need to do because it's just a totally new world. And so you're like, oh, how do I do this?
Exactly.
What are you finding are the most interesting new things that you're learning? So like, what is it that nobody tells you about campaigning that now that you're in it, you're like, oh, this is something that I wasn't aware that needs to be done, or this is something that is new to me?
I think even just the whole process of going through the nomination, the vetting process and the nomination package. I didn't realize how extensive the nomination package was that you have to complete. It's about 50 pages. You have to download like your full Facebook history that you've ever had. And being like a mom with kids, my Facebook has a ton of pictures of kids. So it took like days to download that. And you have to download your Twitter. And they basically just have access to everything, which is good. It should be a thorough vetting, but I don't think I realized quite the scope of that was involved in just getting that part of it ready so that you can then campaign and be out there in the public.
Yeah, wow.
Well, Zach,
I didn't realize that it was an extensive process to get in. So you have to download all of your social media history. That's probably a good thing because if you're what's a good word for it? If you're not nice, that's maybe the wrong person to have in office if you don't like certain people. But what else is in that packet? Like what else are they asking you?
Well, they do like a thorough like background check of if you've ever had like criminal charges. You have to do one of those reports. They ask about any associations, professional associations that you belong to, your employment history, your education. You have to sign off that like border services, the CRA, everybody can check into you and make sure that you're cleared that way. So they do like it is a very thorough vetting. So people, I hope, realize that when your candidates come out the other side of it, they have been thoroughly checked out and they're upstanding citizens. Yeah. It's just extensive, but it's good. It's good that they're doing it.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's wise. That's a good move. I appreciate that. So when is the election? Like when is the moment?
Well, right. They just opened up our nomination process on Friday. So that's our constituency association. Every riding has a constituency association for those that are watching that aren't aware. And that's where, like David's been educating people too with Taking Back Alberta, that's where a lot of the grassroots power comes from, is being involved at that level, because they gather up all of the concerns and information from the constituents and then pass it on to the MLA. So the MLA is kind of there by the grace of the constituency association. It shouldn't be like top down. It should be bottom up. And ours is open now as of Friday. It's a 2-week nomination window where anyone that's a candidate, a proposed candidate like myself, can get their nomination packages in and complete all the things that they need to do. And then that has to be in by February 9th. And then after that, I'm assuming that they will call an election date, because we have a provincial election coming up really quickly. I think they have to do a minimum of 3-week campaign period before the election. And also you have to have your UCP membership for 21 days before the election. So those will probably coincide pretty close. So they haven't called in a date yet or given us information on that, but I'm guessing it will be the very end of February or the very start of March.
Right.
And it's interesting, for those who don't know, the reason they do the 21 days, that you have to have a membership for 21 days before the vote, is because it's actually for democratic fairness, because you don't want to be in a situation where people are like, oh, my opponent has 500 more memberships than I do, or 100 or 50. And once they get the list, and then they would just sell that number and try to get them to show up on the day of. It's just to make sure that there's accountability, that nobody has an unfair advantage if they have the list, that kind of thing. So I actually am a very big fan of the 21 days before not being allowed to be a member. Some people are like, well, why can't I buy a membership right up until? And the story I tell on that is in the leadership race where Gary Marr was facing off against Alison Redford for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party here in Alberta. Alison Redford went and made a deal with the teachers, and this was still when you could buy memberships, kind of like walk in and vote, walk in, buy a membership and vote, made a deal with the teachers in between, because they used to be that they would have what's called runoff ballots. So there'd be a whole bunch of people running, and then it would get down to 2, and they would say, okay, you top 2, since nobody's over 50%, you top 2 will face off in a different round in a couple of weeks or a week or something. I don't remember the exact time period. But what ended up happening was people would then take that time to sell a whole bunch of memberships, make promises like Alison Redford did to the teachers. The teachers bought a whole bunch of memberships and they put her in, even though she really didn't represent the values of even the Progressive Conservative Party, let alone the Wild Rose. At the time, the Wild Rose was a separate party. Now we're one party. But I think that this is a very wise thing to do in terms of how we're running our elections. But what have you found has been the most interesting thing talking to people? What are the people on the ground saying? My favorite thing about campaigning is talking to people who are not necessarily involved in politics, because I find it grounds me, gets me attached to like what real people, I like to call them real people, are thinking, because we people who are obsessed with politics tend to live in a kind of an alternative universe where we're thinking about things that most people are not spending their time thinking. So what are the people you're talking to thinking about? What do they care about?
Well, one that comes up that I find is maybe like just interesting because it's more controversial is the Sovereignty Act. I find that there's a lot of people that understand what it is and the tool that it can be used for and are very, very supportive of it. And then there's people on the other side of it that just think it's awful and are quite scared of it. And I think that it means like separation and leaving Canada. So you get very different viewpoints on that. That's part of the job, I guess, of campaigning too, is trying to educate and inform on what that actually means and what the UCP policies actually are. So that's
do you find okay, so we're the Sovereignty Act, this is an interesting thing to discuss, but what is the biggest concern about, let's say, separation? Is it that they still want to be a part of Canada? Or is it because this is something I've always found fascinating in politics, which is you put something out there as a political group, team, let's call it a party, and you pass it through. And then there's the war of propaganda, which will be the other side saying what it is, you saying what it is. And then there's the third thing, which is what people believe it is. And that's usually the output of whoever wins the communications battle. Yeah. So what do people believe this act is, like, by and large? Because my guess is that most people probably haven't read it. I know there's some awesome keeners out there that have, but my guess is there's very few people who've actually even read it.
Yeah, I think the ones that are worried about it or opposed to it likely haven't read it or have listened to media perception about what it is, or maybe to an NDP perception of what it is. And they think that it's, like a movement to separate from Canada, that it's going to be extremely costly, it's going to be lengthy, and then at the end, we're going to leave Canada, which I don't believe that's what it is at all. The Sovereignty Act is a tool that can help us carve out sovereignty and autonomy within Canada. And it's called Within Canada Act anyways. There's lots of ways that we could use it that will actually increase our prosperity and stopping the government overreach from the federal government, which excites me personally, because I think I'm obviously a farmer. Last time I was on here was in a farming capacity and speaking to that. But even just with things with their proposed or suggested 30% fertilizer reduction, we need some tools that can say, you know what, that doesn't actually work. Having someone in Ottawa, in a big city that's never been to Alberta farming community, dictate to us that you have to decrease this, but at the same time, you're expecting us to increase our food production. That's not going to work. So the Sovereignty Act would be a tool for that, stopping the overreach into our natural resources, our businesses. I just think that it's going to create a lot of prosperity for us if we can stop the federal government from taking that away from us.
Yeah, and I think it could also be used for things like what's happening with the guns here in Canada. And I know Zach cares a lot about hunting and guns, and we've had people on here from various different organizations that are talking about the gun grab. What do you think would be a good example, that if you're just trying to boil it down, when you're just talking to your average person who spends, as I was told once by Ian Brody, the former chief of staff to Stephen Harper, when he was speaking to the interns, he said, remember, you're weird, right? Remember, you're different than everybody else. Your average person spends about 5 minutes a week thinking about politics. Now, I think that's changed personally in the modern era. I think that Facebook and social media in general, combined with the, let's call it the catastrophic government policy overreach that has occurred over the last 2 years, I think there's a lot more people caring about it for a lot more than 5 minutes a week. But what would you say to someone if you're just trying to explain it really simply? I'll give it a shot, then you give it a shot. But I would say the Sovereignty Act is an attempt to establish provincial jurisdiction. So they're in the Constitution, it says these things belong to the provinces, these things belong to the federal government. And all the Sovereignty Act really is to say, we are going to assert our dominion, our authority over the things that the Constitution gives us to have authority over. And we're not going to let you have authority over those things. And we already see that happen a lot with with Quebec. Quebec is constantly asserting their own authority. So give it a shot. What would you say if you had to just summarize it for every day?
You said it pretty well. I guess my wording is just slightly different, but you say it actually much better. I just say that the Sovereignty Act is basically just a document that is serving notice to the federal government that we are aware of the Constitution and our constitutional rights as a province within it. And we're going to take back those powers that you have been overreaching and taking from us.
Okay, so let me jump in there.
Go ahead, Zach. No, this is perfect because Zach.
Yeah, let me.
The kind of person we're trying to explain this to.
I have to ask the dumb questions because I don't understand. But that's good because then all the people who don't understand, who listen to this, might learn something along with me. That's my role here. Okay, so that makes sense. So there are federal jurisdictions and there are provincial jurisdictions. In the scenario that we are in currently, and when I say we, I mean Alberta because that's what we're talking about specifically. Is the federal government reaching into provincial jurisdiction currently?
Yes, it is, in lots of different ways.
Okay.
So a big one that you would notice is in like our taxation. So transfer payments, our CPP, all those things that we pay a whole bunch into and don't get back the same amount. It goes elsewhere.
Okay. So
and a couple examples that I would raise, Zach, that we may have heard about in a few other podcasts we've done, but this is a good reminder. Number one, that resource development and extraction is provincial jurisdiction. So anything that comes into that and says you can't do this because of X, Y, and Z, that's actually an infringement on provincial jurisdiction. Healthcare is provincial jurisdiction. In fact, it's kind of ridiculous that we even have a minister of health on the federal level, because it's very clear that education and healthcare, they belong to the provinces. The federal government's not supposed to be involved in them. But what's happened and I think it was great that you brought up taxation, was the federal government collects far more taxes than any other jurisdiction, municipal, provincial, federal. So they're the ones collecting all the taxes. So they have all the money. So the provinces come to them and they say, well, we need more money because we don't have enough money for healthcare, and you're the one collecting the taxes from our citizens. And then the federal government says, well, we'll give you more money, but we're going to put strings attached to this, whether it's on resource extraction or healthcare. And that was the big concern during COVID, right? Is that Kenny was worried. We were in the middle of a massive problem in oil prices. So oil prices had actually gone negative. So people were paying money to people to take their oil because in COVID, demand dried up for oil and just prices crashed. And then what we ended up seeing was the federal government, through the COVID measures, was threatening not to do transfers on health and other things to Alberta or to any province if they didn't fall in line with the rules. So the federal government uses their the fact that they're the ones that collect the money, and they have more resources than any other level of government, to manipulate the provinces on jurisdictions that belong to the provinces, on areas like healthcare, like resource extraction. Thankfully, they haven't moved too far into education, but they really do push on advanced education like universities. They're using that to manipulate. They're using the power of the purse strings to manipulate.
And it costs us a ton. If we have natural resource development hampered, energy costs go way up, then everything goes up. So our affordability is directly tied to all of that too.
Okay, so I have more questions. Here we go. Okay, so that makes sense. And I was going to ask how a province might lose some of that sovereignty when it comes to provincial jurisdiction, but David already explained the question, or the answer, before I was able to ask the question. So the question now becomes, because we're talking about whether or not this is a good idea for Alberta, if Alberta were to take back that jurisdiction, and in essence, with the Sovereignty Act, they're serving Ottawa notice. They're saying, we're taking this back. It would be easy enough to assume that Ottawa might say, okay, cool, we're going to dish out less money to you because we don't have those, you're breaking off those strings that we have on you. Financially speaking, does Alberta come out more rich even though they're getting less money from Ottawa? Is through that process, are you going to be able to retain more of your money and keep it within the province? Or does this turn into a financial burden for Alberta?
I think that it would be hugely more prosperous for us to take back some of those controls and powers. Actually, I remember going to an Alberta Prosperity Project event and listening to Dr. Dennis Modry speak. And he referenced, I think his statistics were that if we had never been involved in the national energy program of Trudeau Sr., and we hadn't had the transfer payments ever since then, basically, we would have been living this entire period of time with an 8 to 10% flat income tax and no property taxes. And that sounds like a good number, but then when you really start and think about that, what would your life have been like, or your parents' lives have been like, if that entire time of their working adult lives, they paid a flat 8 to 10% tax and no property tax? Like, the level of wealth and prosperity would have been gigantic. So we have given away so much. And even with the CPP, we pay 20% more into the CPP than Alberta actually gets back in CPP payments. That kind of speaks to having our own pension fund in Alberta.
Well, even just the notion that you have to pay the federal government pension so that they can give you pension back just seems like an unnecessary step. Like if you just think about it logically.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's paternalistic, right? What ultimately one of the big issues I think that we face in Canada is we don't want people, and rightly so to a degree. There's a compassionate heart that we have, and you and I have seen this in the work that we've done, Zach, interviewing people. But people do have compassionate hearts. But the problem is the government has now taken that compassion and twisted it into, you can't take care of yourself, we will take care of you, right? Like you can't save up for your retirement and you're not having enough kids to take care of you when you're old, so we'll take care of you, right? We'll give us X amount of money every month, and then when you're old, we'll take care of you. Except I think all three of us on here can attest, I don't think that pension fund's going to be there when we're old.
And when we leave it to the government as our plan to take care of us later on, that prosperity, really, we should be empowering our people and our grassroots to have industry where they can, create a level of wealth. Because even if you look at all the hospital wings, the baseball stadiums, all of those, they're all named after very wealthy individuals who've built gigantic businesses. And then once you reach a level of prosperity, people want to take care of each other. I think that is our nature, especially in this riding. We do a great job of taking care of our communities, but you have to enable us to achieve a level of prosperity so that we can take care of other people.
Okay, there's I want to touch briefly on a point that was made that I think is really, really important, and I want to clarify something. So you were saying 8 to 10% income tax, no property tax. Does Alberta currently have sales tax?
No, we have no sales tax.
You have no
we have a
tax.
GST like everybody else, but no provincial sales tax.
They talk about it sometimes. It gets brought up, but so far we pushed that off.
What is that like? I wish I knew. So if Alberta were to retain more of its money, because I want to boil this down to the citizen, because we can talk about the province all we want, but what people really care about is how is it going to directly benefit me if I live in Alberta, right? So if Alberta were to take back some of that provincial sovereignty that is awarded already in the Constitution, if the province itself was more prosperous, that prosperity could be passed on to the citizen by way of taxation reduction. Yes?
Taxation reduction and also just affordability of all the things that we need. If we take back control of our natural resource development, our energy costs are going to be lower. Our energy costs is what's causing everything to be more expensive right now. If we stop the government from overreaching into our agriculture industry and our producers, our food costs are going to not be as high either. Like there's lots of ways that it will directly affect your day-to-day living, your energy bills, your food bills, how you go about living within your family budget.
So let me pose a question to David, because I feel like David will be able to answer this really, really well. If in my mind's eye, the way it should work is that the federal government is sitting in Ottawa and they are working their very best to ensure that everyone is as prosperous as possible in Canada. But it doesn't seem to be that way with how they're treating Alberta. So what is the federal government's motivation for dropping those strings into Alberta and saying, we'll chip you some more cash here, but we're gonna change what you're doing so that it benefits us? Because it has to benefit them somewhere, in some way. What is their motivation?
Well, if you remember when Michael Binion came on and he drew the distinction between people who are pursuing power and people who are pursuing, let's call it wealth. But like the best, I liked his analogy, we have the shopkeepers and we have the power mongers, right? And most of the world, a lot of the world is run by people who are seeking power and control. And if power and control are your goal, then the prosperity of your citizens is not your objective. And here in Alberta, very different from pretty much the rest of the country. Although I would say Saskatchewan, southwestern Ontario, eastern Ontario, elements of around Quebec City, there are people who are more what we'll call shopkeepers. Alberta is primarily the political jurisdiction that is most committed to this idea. So what does that idea mean? It means if I work hard and I build something and that thing works, then I should become prosperous because of it. And that's what I'm focused on, is building things that work, that can bring prosperity to myself and others. But that is not actually what most people are seeking when they're seeking political power. They're seeking control. And we see this in the story of Canada, right? With when it goes from Pierre Elliott Trudeau till now, where we're seeing a erosion of provincial rights and a centralization of power in Ottawa, not to make things better, although they would argue that, and that would be their propaganda for why we need to do that, but simply because they want more power and control. And I don't know if this is true, but the theory I've heard is, and we've had someone say this on this podcast, is that Alberta was growing so fast economically that it was going to overtake Quebec, and then eventually people thought that it would eventually overtake Ontario because there's so much wealth in our natural resources. And because of that, the National Energy Program is literally an equalization program. It's to pull down Alberta and lift up others by taking from Alberta and giving to others. So, sorry, I got to sneeze here 1 second.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you. But because they were worried that the economic influence and growth of Alberta would become so extreme that it would overtake the influence and economic power of Ontario and Quebec, they decided to push it down. So while it might have hurt people, it kept the center of power and influence in Ontario and Quebec. And that's why we call them the Laurentian elites. But I'd love Tanya's ideas on this.
I'm actually just wondering, why have you never gone into politics? You can articulate everything so well.
Well, I am in politics in my own way.
Well, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, David's got
many. But I'd love to hear what you think. Why does Ontario treat Alberta, and not even just Ontario necessarily, Ottawa? Let's say Ottawa. Why does Ottawa want to limit our prosperity and growth?
Maybe it's I think that they do probably want to limit it, but maybe it's not fully that. It's just that they want to increase their own prosperity and wealth. And because Alberta has always been such a driver of our economy, we've been able to take care of the entire country almost from our single province. So I think that they've seen that and they just wanted to harness that. And it does bring a level of prosperity for the entire country when Alberta is doing well. So that kind of goes against a lot of the things they're doing right now. I don't quite understand why they're trying to create all these punitive policies that decreases Alberta's wealth when we've literally been increasing the wealth of our entire country. So I don't know that I have a good answer for that because I don't understand why they are doing this. It seems counterproductive. What is
the NDP's perspective in Alberta on all of this? And the reason I ask is, I cannot fathom, and perhaps this is my ignorance, perhaps this is just not what they believe, but I cannot fathom that a party right now would want to get into office and say, yeah, we want to keep chipping tons of money out to the federal government and not keeping as much of it for ourselves. It's just, it seems almost like anti-human nature. So could you maybe brief, because we're talking about the future of Alberta and therefore the future of the country at the beginning of this episode, and we have this big election, but and the contenders are the NDP and the Conservatives in Alberta. What is the NDP's platform and ideas? Kind of brief that, and then make an argument for why the Conservative vision is better for the people of Alberta.
Well, I guess the NDP are fundamentally a socialist party. it's funny that lately it seems like most things that Rachel Notley has been saying are almost a similar platform to what the UCP platform is, that we need to fix healthcare, we need to fix education, we need to do all these things. But a lot of the problems in those are rooted from a socialist mentality. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Sorry with that. I think that
let's reframe the question. What do you think the biggest differences are between the NDP's vision for Alberta and the UCP's vision for Alberta?
The UCP wants an autonomous, more independent Alberta that empowers the people individually to be able to create their own wealth. And I think that the NDP would like to have more of that nanny state where they're going to take care of everybody. You guys just pay your taxes and we'll decide how we're going to distribute them to you to take care of you.
Yeah, it's really the victim mentality versus personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. I've heard it said a lot that we don't want left versus right anymore. We need to go deeper than that and say what are the values that are being argued about here. And I think the values are Jordan Peterson is a great example of the values that are on the right, and people are like, oh, he has his own problems, people paint him in a certain way. But the question is, are you going to clean your own room, or are you going to ask your mom to clean your room? Right? Yeah. That's it.
It's interesting that you say left versus right too, because I feel like maybe just because I'm from the rural perspective too, it feels almost more like it's a city versus like an urban versus rural divide. And you can see that when they do their election predictions of which ridings are going to go which way. Rural is predominantly of the mindset of UCP. It's almost like across the board UCP. And then urban is where we lose out to the NDP. So in the big cities, they have more of that perspective. And out in the country here, we're much more conservative minded overall.
I've pondered that
question.
Why
do you think that is?
Yeah, that's the question I was going for.
Go. Yeah, there you go.
We're on the same page. Why is it that
we often are.
Why is it that the people in the cities are like, take my money, govern me harder, and then the people in the country are like, I want to be left alone. Like I can handle myself. Why do you think psychologically that happens?
I think one part of it is actually we're very far removed from our agricultural and rural community now. It used to be just 1 degree of separation at most. Everybody had an uncle or a grandpa or some farm in their family that they would go visit or they'd go work on in the summers. And they understood what that hardworking grassroots, building something, growing food, being attached to the land. They got some kind of connection with that. And now our generations are so far removed from it that some people don't have any connection whatsoever to agriculture. So that can create a little bit of the divide. It's just not having the connection, not having the education.
Yeah, it's crazy how different people can be. I mean, I don't have a farming background other than the fact that both David and my grandfather, he was a farmer. But I love the outdoors. I love crawling around in the dirt when I'm hunting. I love getting into nature. I love all of those sorts of things. And then you run into people who, if they get dirt on their shoe, it's like a problem. It's just, it is unbelievable and fascinating and very interesting how different people can be and how that spills out into the political. David, why do you think that people in the cities want bigger government and people in the countries don't? What is your answer to that question?
I feel bad because I feel like I'm taking up so much airtime, so I apologize, Tanya. But
I will say your thoughts.
I will say my piece on this one because I think it's important. I believe that rural people are morally superior to urban people, and people go, "Oh no, what? You think they're better?" And no, I just think that their environment makes them better. I think, and that depends on my belief of what's better. So this is a subjective viewpoint, and I'd love for some urban people to argue with me on this. But what I have seen is that rural life forces personal responsibility. It's pretty hard if you live in a rural environment not to, okay, I've got to fix my toilet, or, oh no, the electricity's out, I've got to get my generator going because I might freeze to death if people don't come in time. there's things that you have to put in place when you live in a rural life to take care of yourself, because nobody's coming to save you. Like, yes, we have good neighbors, and in times of crisis, neighbors will come and help. Oh, and I want to be clear. I'm an urban person. Like, I grew up rural, but like, I'm not good at taking care of myself. I'm working on this. This is something that I want to get better at. So when I'm saying that I feel like rural people are morally superior, I'm admiring them from my place of trying to become better, right? Like, while like you said, Zach, our grandfather was a farmer. Our mothers were raised on a farm, and I was raised in rural Alberta. I spent my entire adult life in the city, right? So I'm learning this. I want to get better at these things. So I'm not judging other people. I'm actually even speaking to myself. But what I've noticed, and I'd love your thoughts on this after, is people who have more personal responsibility and have to take care of themselves, they simply are more character driven. They care more about who you are as a person. They care more about your humanity. They care more about taking care of themselves than being taken care of. And I mean, the hypothesis that I have is that a person who's taking responsibility for their own life and trying to deal with their problems is morally superior to someone who's asking other people to take care of their problems.
Well, that's very flattering. Thank you. I'm sure our riding appreciates hearing that from you too. I would also add that I think that being in a rural riding, our family unit is just very, very important. And we realize that the family unit is the building block of our entire area. Geographically, our riding is gigantic. But if you are a farmer in Livingstone-Macleod and you farm down by Fort Macleod and I farm up in the northeast corner, we still would count each other as neighbors. It's just the building blocks of being in the rural setting create a huge sense of community. So that might be something that's a little bit different in the city too. Like, we know, all the farmers around here, they're generational. We know the family names from forever. Even if we're giving directions for how to go to the next piece of land at harvest time, it's like, we'll go to the old Scott place and then turn left until you get to the Palin's yard and, things like that.
I remember my grandfather talking like that.
Community.
I remember my grandfather giving directions like that or speaking like that. It wasn't, go to this road. It was, well, at this, at the big oak tree, you need to go this way.
Yeah. Or my favorite one is my husband used to tell me, well, just turn where the yellow house used to be.
The
yellow house. I mean, I'm still that way in Red Deer. Like, I don't know the names of any of the streets. I'm just like, well, go over to where Josh Graber used to live in that area. And then
there's your rural mentality. It's killing you.
Yeah. I want to extrapolate and do my best attempt to kind of philosophize the difference between the rural and the city centric, and draw out an idea that I've been thinking about, even in my own life. And this is coming from an area like David, where I want to be doing better, and this is something that I'm thinking about. So we've kind of contrasted in the rural life. You have to be self-sufficient if the power goes out. You have to be able to fix something if it breaks. It takes longer to call someone out. You have to just be more resourceful yourself. And if you contrast that to someone who lives in a city, who can wake up, shower, go downstairs in their apartment building where there's a Starbucks in the lobby, grab breakfast on the way out, toss that wrapper and that finished drink into a garbage that someone else picks up and takes away for them, hop on a city bus so that they don't have to drive and go to work. That is an okay way to live. But what I'm realizing in my own life is that when you sacrifice personal responsibility for convenience, your life might get easier, but you get softer. And I didn't realize that at first. So now I'm kind of on this mentality of, and obviously you have to be able to be realistic about it, because what's really convenient? Being able to conduct an interview with two people in Alberta from Ontario. Like, you can't.
There's lots of benefits.
Like, I didn't get on a plane to go do this. There was a more convenient and a smarter way to do it. So it's not that you should reject convenience outright, but you shouldn't do things the easy way always. And what I mean by that, the way that you can manifest that in your own personal life, if you want to take more responsibility for the outcomes that you see in your own life, learn how to cook. Simple things like that. Learn how to cook. take responsibility for your health, exercise, get out into your community and meet the people around you and create community. Reject the convenience of just staying at home, ordering in food, and turning into a blob, because that the country that we are shooting for, the country that we want going forward, is going to be defined by the individual citizens who live in that country. And politics and the culture war kind of go hand in hand, but that's a piece in the culture war that I want to fight. I want to encourage the people listening to this podcast to find a way to reject convenience in your life and instead adopt personal responsibility, because you will become a better person if you do that, and you will become harder, and we need that.
And that's not just an urban rural thing. That's just an everyone thing. That's just how to be a good human being, right? Like, I'm wearing my Apple Watch so that I can get my text messages more conveniently. Like, we all do things for convenience, but there's that balance of, okay, how can I be conveniently operating my life and also working at becoming the best human being that I can be? So yeah, part of that too is doing scary things. Just go do the scary things.
Like running for office, right? Stay uncomfortable. like running for office, right? You're taking that step. You're putting your name on a ballot. You're opening yourself up to criticism and ridicule, and when people run for office, and I want to be clear on this for everyone listening, they are going to face people saying nasty things about them, because as soon as you're running for office, what are you now engaging in? You're engaging in the pursuit of power, right? Because ultimately, that's what politics is how do we distribute power, right? And so you're entering into this arena where people are willing to do almost anything for power, right? And it doesn't matter whether they're in the UCP or the NDP. There's people everywhere who want power. And because the stakes are higher, because power is on the line, people are going to be willing to do more to get it. So how are you steeling yourself individually for the attacks that are inevitably going to come? Like, the NDP will undoubtedly try to attack you and your worldview and claim that you're crazy, because they've done it to me. They've done it to Danielle. They're going to do it to you. So how are you going to handle that?
Well, I'm going to have to create a little bit more of a thicker skin. I know that going into it. But my mom said to me before I was fully committed to going into it, she's like, I just worry about your soft heart and how that's going to handle it. It's like, you know what? I think that having a soft heart to extent can be also empowering to the people that you're representing, because you're going to be more sympathetic. You're going to be more engaged with them. You actually care. So my entering into this race is definitely not about the pursuit of power. I debated going into it the first time that it was open in November, came across someone who seemed very put together, spoke a lot of the language that I understood, and thought, okay, I don't have to commit to this big leap yet. I hadn't had time to fully talk it over with my family and stuff. So then by the time the second one came open again, I'd had that time to have those conversations and realize that, yeah, this is something that I actually needed to do, because I view leadership as a service. I've always been committed to being engaged and volunteering with my community, and I see it as a civic duty, which is almost unfortunate in a way, because it would be a lot easier to not go into it. But we need good people into it. So when I'm not seeking power for me, but I'm seeking power for a constituency, for the grassroots. And largely it is because of groups like yours, like Taking Back Alberta and the Alberta Prosperity Project, and all these groups that have been empowering the grassroots to actually speak up. So now we need leadership that also takes that to the legislature for them. So I don't know if I'm going to be hit with this bombardment of things really soon. Right now, it's been actually just really supportive. And the riding that I live in, I've known a lot of these families for years, for generations. I've seen their struggles. I've worked through the struggles the last couple of years with them. I've fought alongside them. I've done campaigns with them to stop overreach from the government. So I feel very connected to them, and the support has been great. I find it hard to believe that anyone from our constituency is going to be really on the attack, but maybe that will come from the top down of the NDP or something like that. Just going to enter into it with some civility and the ability to have civil discourse, even with different viewpoints. And hopefully that will work well.
Well, I promise the attacks will come because this is politics.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying I know where they'll come from. But just in my experience, they don't need to. There doesn't need to be any foundation for them, right? They could just be outright lies. But I would encourage you to, when those moments come, and they will come, to really dig down into that community, because I think that is another thing that you pointed out, that you have in that local area, the people, like people who know who used to live on what house and what corner and who their neighbors are. That's community.
Yeah.
And so I would say dig into that community and let that be a big part of your strength, because we don't need to do this alone.
Thank you. And I will do that. And it has been really awesome. I've had like just a couple of people that I haven't seen in years phone the other day. And the one man is about my dad's age. And he just phoned and said, "Hi, Tanya. Haven't talked to you in a long time. I just want to tell you, I'm so proud of you for doing this." And he just kind of got teary on the phone. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. Like, come talk. Let's figure out what we got to do here." So that kind of stuff gives you like the energy and the motivation to continue through. And then also just being able to speak, I think, authentically. I don't have to like step back and think about, okay, what should I say? What's the right thing to say? I'm just trying to speak authentically to the issues and the voices that I'm hearing from our constituency. So that keeps it easier to keep your head a little bit level.
An honest politician. Imagine.
Well, I'm not a politician yet.
And I know that there are plenty of good people in politics who are working very honestly and very hard, but I was just laughing. Yeah. I was laughing at the stereotype. We've got a couple more minutes here. I just briefly, because last time we had you on, we talked about the 30% reduction in fertilizer use. And we haven't really heard much about it since, that idea was floated across the country. And because you're a farmer, you are very much plugged into the problem and what's going on. So where is it sitting now? Is there a required 30% reduction? Is it a suggestion? Like what's going on?
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, actually. Like it's been just a suggestion so far. I don't know any farmers that have willingly reduced their fertilizer by 30% so they could then decrease their profits and their food production. That seems crazy to me. But just last night, I was reading that the True North had got access to documents from the federal government that they actually had a regulatory backstop in place, that if the suggested 30% fertilizer reduction didn't happen and people didn't buy into that, then they had different ways that they were going to actually forcefully implement it. So whether they actually act on that for sure or not, it's definitely something that they've considered acting on.
Okay, so let's just refresh the listeners from your perspective as a farmer, why a 30% reduction in fertilizer doesn't work.
Well, even if you think to the house plants that you have in your house, they thrive and grow the best when you water them, you fertilize them, and they have access to sunlight. So taking away 30% of the fertilizer for our plants is going to reduce the amount of product that we actually produce. We're trying to feed a growing global population, but we're actually reducing the amount of food that we can produce. Like it literally doesn't make sense to do that. And also when you add nitrogen into plants, that actually increases their carbon assimilation from the air. So it's totally backwards what they're trying to do here. You want us to decrease the nitrogen we use, which is going to decrease the carbon dioxide that we're fixing out of the air that you also want us to do. Like, doesn't make any sense.
What do you think the motivation is then? Why the idea? Why the policy?
I question if maybe it's to create more dependency on the government. If they control the food supply and decrease the food supply, then we're going to all be more dependent on the government to help us out, to give us back rebates so that we can buy more groceries, because we're not going to be able to afford them.
Yeah, it's really easy to control hungry people.
Mm-hmm.
David,
yeah, it's a backwards policy made by people that are not involved in the ag industry whatsoever.
Well, I've been thinking about this particular topic a lot, and this would be a great way to conclude this episode, is talking about food security. But the amount of separation that people now have from their food is baffling to me. Mm-hmm. Right? Like all throughout human history, we were connected to our food. Right? We killed our food, we processed our own food, we made our own food. But because of this insane wealth that we've created with the specialization of capitalism and things like that, I can walk into a grocery store and I can get food from anywhere in the world. I can get like oranges from California or grapes from Europe. Like, that's just all there. And so in the minds of, I would argue, the majority of the North American human species, let's call it, or the Canadian human species, food is something you go and get from a grocery store. Or if you're a certain level of wealth, it's just something that you go and someone prepares for you and you eat and you leave and you don't even have to worry about dishes or any of that stuff. That's the modern paradigm, or the skip the dishes, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
What do you think that mentality does for someone like yourself, who's spent so much time growing the food, making that food for people? Where do you think the disconnect is for people, and how do we help them understand that food just doesn't appear? It's not just a thing that exists. You have to make it.
Lots of it, I guess, is education and advocacy. And we have been doing a lot of that, but sometimes we're just met with resistance, I think, by the media. The media could actually be a source that could help us out with that education. When you speak about how our food is just so readily available too, I just want to point out that is largely, if you go back, attributed to our fossil fuel industry, which has allowed us the ability to create all this technology, which has freed up our time so that we can be ingenious and innovative and create more technology so that we have more time to do other things. And our food isn't having to be hunted, like you said, and gathered and processed and grown at home. We actually have been able to get that from other places now because of technology. So I think education is a big part of that. And just being able to actually have civil discourse around what it is, being able to hear all the sides. The government pushes policies like this, but they don't give us a voice to be able to speak back as to why they're punitive or why they don't work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any final words before we kind of wrap this up? Is there anything you want to say to your potential constituency?
Well, I guess just that I'm coming here with open ears, and I come to advocate for you and listen to you and fight back alongside you. I've been born and raised here with deep rural roots, so this constituency is very important to me. I just want to see it in a positive state, not restricted like we have been in the past, where everybody has the opportunity to grow and be prosperous.
All right. Well, that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.